The next question: what place does the olive tree blossom and fruit, or the olive tree fruit and blossom, have on the calendar? Well, that's a very interesting question because the truth is the word shaked is almond, and it's only used in scripture about 8 times. So we don't have a lot of reference to take a look at the importance of the almond tree, whether it is in bloom or it's making the nut, or I mean, there's really just not a lot said. But the thing that we do know is even though the scripture doesn't point to a specific timing when the blooming or the fruiting is due within the biblical calendar, what we do know, generally speaking, or I do know, and most of the world knows just because it seems to have become very common knowledge, is that the almond tree will bloom ahead of the beginning of the year. It'll bloom sometime later in the 12th month, and this is just general terms because that's really all we have. And even just speaking about the almond tree itself, sometimes the tree will bloom without leaves, and other years the trees will have leaves and then bloom. So it's a very interesting situation that we have with the almond tree. Um, the other thing we can do is we can look to the root of the Hebrew word for almond. Shechet comes from the word shakad, and it's a root that means to be alert, sleepless, on the lookout. We can see a verse in the Song of Solomon, 127, verse 1, a song of degrees for Solomon. Except the Lord built the house, they labor in vain that built it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, shakad, but in vain. So again, that kind of has a connotation of the house of the Lord being built, and that idea of being watchful, the watchman being watchful. And we do know that the tabernacle was set up in the first month and the first day of the new year, the day that Elohim commanded it to be erected, and this would have happened sometime ahead of that. So that's very interesting on the connections there, but we really don't have anything solid. But again, I'm speaking to you of my experience of 9 years of seeing the almond tree bloom in the 12th month ahead of the beginning of the year. So could we safely assume that the blooming of the almond tree was a signal for the approaching of the head of the year? I think so, yes, a signal. But a signal is not a required sign. There is a big difference. But all in all, I think that the almond tree probably meant more to our patriarchs who received the word because they lived with the word. And I can go further into that. For example, I know from my experience of being in Israel for 9 years that the olive tree will bloom, the pomegranate will bloom, and the palm tree will bloom at Shavuot, at Pentecost. I also know that those same fruits will all be ready in the 7th month. There's some things that they would have known because these words were written to them, and they lived by them, and they lived with them. So I think maybe some of that might have been a little bit lost to us as of today. It can always be regained whenever the Father deems it is time to release the information back to us. The other thing I can tell you is that there are two types of almonds in the wild areas of Israel. We have a bitter almond, and it is poison. It has cyanide inside the nut. In fact, if a child eats, let's say, 7 almonds, it could kill him. Those have to be roasted, and that appears to take care of the poison within the nut. There's also an almond bush, and it's a small bush, mostly free of leaves, and has little buds of little nuts on them. Well, now, was the domestic sweet almond growing at the time that the children of Israel were in the desert? I would not expect to find that in the desert. I would expect to find the bitter almond or the almond bush. But it doesn't really matter which one of those it would have been because this tree will bloom in the rainy season. And so I believe that they would have relatively all bloomed within the same general time of the year.